Hi, friends. I'm so honored to be here today with Howard Resnick, the one and only. I will be addressing him as Goswami. I've known him for so many years, most of my life. And we're here to discuss his new novel, Justin Davis. And I want to just start by saying, that I've known you most of my life since my early teens. And since that time, I've heard you speak of this novel. So it's been in the ether and it's been in the works, it's been in your imagination and your heart for so many years. So it's just really exciting to see it finally being here, being with us. And so, first of all, I want to congratulate you and ask, how does it feel to finally be complete with this work?
It's a big relief. It's a big relief. I first, it was, I think back around 1981 that's embarrassing.
Oh, well, before I was born, basically.
Yeah, it's for I was, of course, practicing bhakti yoga within the Krishna consciousness movement. And it was obvious to me that because this spiritual science came from a foreign country, foreign to Westerners, from India, that there was a significant cultural barrier, and that the actual spiritual science, the actual philosophy and practice were to me universal, and if properly explained, could be easily understood and appreciated by many people in many different cultures, but that somehow that wasn't really coming across. And so I had the idea that of writing a book, a novel, that could reach many people who simply could not get over this barrier of a very different external culture.
Mhm. Right. Actually, when I was reading the book, I could sense two very strong forces. And of course, you probably felt like there were many forces at work to bring this to life. But two very distinct forces that I saw was one, this desire to tell a really good story. I mean, it's a page turner, there's suspense, there's character building, there's everything in a good story. So I can see that you really put your mind and heart and creativity to create a genuinely, attractive story. So that's one really strong force in the book. But then the second really strong motivation I could see was what you're saying, this need or desire to transmit a spiritual teaching. And so my question to you is, was there ever a conflict in marrying those two forces? Because it doesn't seem necessarily to be a natural marriage because they are two distinct kind of drives. So what was your thought process there and how did you go about that?
Excellent question. I When I began trying to write, I realized, if I can borrow a term from psychology, I was a bit creatively frigid,
Mm-hmm.
in the sense that I'd been engaged in this bhakti yoga practice very seriously with strict rules and monastic life for so many years, that when I realized I have to create real characters, believable
Right.
characters,
Right.
and my first reaction was, "Ooh, that's embarrassing." So, because in the bhakti yoga practice, it's like, don't speculate, don't you have to follow the path and
Right.
everything, and so it took me a while to work through all that, sort of get back, because when I was much younger, when I was a kid, student at Berkeley back in the late '60s, doing all kinds of wild things, I loved to write, and it was just natural for me to just sort of say what I was feeling, probably a little too much. But
I don't think you've stopped doing that.
so I had to work my way through all that, and so then I set myself these personal, what would you call it, requirements or rules for my writing. And that is,
Mm.
I wasn't going to publish the book unless I felt that spiritually it really had substance. I didn't want to water everything down. I wanted, as far as I could, to put real spiritual substance. At the same time, I was equally determined not to compromise the literary quality.
Right.
And so it took a while for me to discover. In a sense, I had to go back to my own spiritual understanding and rediscover the universality of it. Get past the specificity and what and how do you articulate this universality in a way which is understandable to people who are not familiar with the tradition. And so for years I was working on that because I was determined. I don't want this to be what we used to call jokingly, pop goes the Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is the main text, and so it's just like you write a novel just as an excuse
yeah. To transmit. Yeah, no, this book definitely doesn't come across like that.
So it had to have the literary quality, it had to have the spiritual quality, at least as far as I was able to do it. And also, I suppose I was, of course, inspired by the medium, by that particular genre of the novel, as something which allowed you not just to write, let's say, a nonfiction essay on psychology or spiritual precepts, but to give life as we actually experience it as a whole. Because even though sometimes we may think or talk about psychology or history or all kinds of things, but we actually experience life as a sort of a seamless whole. We just live life, and all these different elements come together. So I thought the novel really presents life as a whole, as we actually experience it.
Yeah, I mean, I found that I had to set aside what I know about you over all these years, someone who's very witty, intellectual, expressive. I had to put everything I know about you aside so that I could really absorb this new part of you that you're expressing in the novel, because there is a lot of softness, there is a lot of kind of this nobility and family values. There is a lot of genuine heart there, which a softness that I had never seen in you before. So I think that I could see that you're transmitting or tapping into another side of yourself through this medium. And that brings me to my next question, which you've touched upon a little bit. But basically, as a leader in the Hare Krishna movement, you're a guru, you have a following, you have many people looking up to you. How did you set aside that and all expectations you must be feeling and the pressure to be a certain way and to produce a certain type of contents, to give lectures in a certain way? I mean, you're aware of your audience, I'm sure, and your followers and like that. And how did you set that aside and open yourself to creativity, especially in most religious organizations kind of vilify the imagination, So how did you set all of that aside to then embrace fully your own creativity, your own heart, and to be able to express it in this more freeing medium? You're saying it's more freeing, but how did you really overcome all those identities as a guru?
It's a very interesting question. I feel like the questions are so good that I'm actually understanding better what I did by listening to the questions. I guess I remember when I was at Harvard, I attended a lecture on Christianity at the Divinity School, and the professor, who was a really nice guy, he said something which I never forgot. And that is that he said that in the Christian universe, in other words, all the different kinds of Christianity, Orthodox, Roman Catholic, all the Protestant denominations, Coptic, whatever, that there are two groups of people. I mean, there are many ways you can analyze, but there are two groups of people: those who have sort of a simple faith and believe it, and it says here in this book, and others who also have faith and devotion, but who need personally a rational understanding. People that care about history, real history, like who wrote these books, how did they come to be, what. and so on and so forth. And so in ISKCON, or the Hare Krishna movement, inevitably, simply because it's composed of human beings, there are these two groups. In any human organization, it can be religious, political, cultural, social, whatever, there are people who need a rational understanding, history-based, philosophy-based understanding, and those who don't, who may tend to just be satisfied with a particular doctrine or particular faith or devotion, which is not bad.
Right. I mean, I think what comes to mind is it's simple for the simple and
Yes.
complex for the complex.
Yes.
Which always suits me because I'm more on the complex side, and it makes it a little more.
Well, actually, my teacher, Prabhupada, his very first instruction to me in 1969, I was a student at Berkeley. And when I began my practice, I wrote to him and asked whether I should stay in school or just do full-time, service.
Right.
In the temple.
Mm-hmm.
And Prabhupada wrote back to me and said, you should finish your education. He said, your duty is to present this ancient knowledge to educated people.
Mm-hmm.
And to do that, you have to be educated.
Right.
So that was the very first instruction I received, and sort of became my life mission, you could say. And so I knew that when I write this book, inevitably there is a Hare Krishna peanut gallery. There are going to be people out there, saying, throw the bum out, because I tend to I try to make a contemporary presentation. And because I personally need a rational, faithful, but also rational, not only faithful, not only logic chopping, but I need to understand in a reasonable, intelligent, history-based way what I'm doing.
Right.
And what I've found is that there are many, many people in the Krishna movement who have a similar need. And so I know that some people will take this as just one more reason, one more confirmation of my, depraved condition, but that many, many, thousands of followers would be inspired. And my personal experience is that when I don't really see a dichotomy between trying to present this knowledge to, you could say, practitioners, believers, whatever you want to call it, and let's say the general public, because, to be blunt here, in a rare departure from usual diplomacy, but to be blunt here,
go for it.
In terms of Western members of the Krishna conscious movement, those who are Western, and I don't mean that as a racial designation, but just or Western in terms of their cultural outlook and their primary residence. I mean, everyone is aware. You have to be a blind fool not to see that a spiritual movement which had great success in the late 60s and 70s is not having anything like great success or even modern. It's times have changed. And so I think there's a lot of very sincere, intelligent members of the Krishna Society who are very anxious, extremely anxious to find a way to get through to the general public, get past all these superficial external cultural barriers. And so I found that whenever I give a lecture or write an article or a book that really does connect with the outside world, that's the stuff that the inside people love the most, because a lot of people feel that it's helping them to find a way to be successful in their own outreach.
Right. Well, I'm hearing you say a lot of words like rational, intellectual, and kind of that's who you are, who I've known you to be all these years, somebody extremely intelligent or able to articulate in that. But I feel like creativity taps into a much softer side of oneself. Would you agree with that? Because, again, the book itself, I've the past 3 days, I've just been immersed in that world, 750 pages. So,
is that how long it is?
It is.
Sorry about that.
So
very small pages, very big print.
and I definitely didn't experience it as an exercise in intellectuality. You know, that there was that, you know, you give voice to a lot of your thoughts about Indology and South Asian history and these things that you're talking about, history, wanting to, so, you know, you have your characters speak about that, but that felt to me like a smaller part
Yes,
of
yes,
it,
of
because
course.
it is what you're saying, it is a creative work first, maybe as a vehicle to transmit certain things. So, and you were mentioning here that you felt encouraged by, or you felt encouraged by knowing that this work will be received probably favorably by a lot of your followers. It struck me, however, that it doesn't seem to be written for a Hare Krishna audience specifically. It seems to be written more for
The general audience.
a general audience.
Well, actually, you raised a very important, interesting question, which is that it's a really important question. It's kind of, and it's something which Western civilization has been struggling with for centuries. And that is kind of the relationship between reason and feeling. And so, if you look at the 18th century, you get the Age of Reason,
Right.
where just everything was science and everything had to be rational. But they went too far, and then it produced its equal and opposite reaction, which was Romanticism,
Mm.
which of course naturally went too far on the other side. And then, but as far as your question, which I found to be really, really insightful question, I will refer here to my own writing guru, who is Jane Austen. You know, I have a spiritual guru, bro, but my writing guru is Jane Austen. And so, if you take, there's a book, Sense and Sensibility, and Marianne Dashwood is way too far on the emotion side. She doesn't want to be reasonable. She just wants to feel,
Mhm.
and you know, and she exalts her passions above any type of reason, and then gets her and almost kills herself doing so.
Mm.
And so then at the end, when she's learned her lesson, as all good Jane Austen heroines do, when she learns her lesson, her conclusion is that I have to restore my life, because she almost died from what she, and she said she's going to do it with two things: religion and reason.
Mm.
And so to me, if you take emotions, as we know, can be good or bad. I mean, some people feel the emotion that I should, you know, kill my spouse, or that I should, you know, do some other horrible thing, or you know, people do all kinds of evil because emotionally driven.
Right.
And of course, people also can make evil calculations. But so therefore, what Krishna teaches in the Gita, get back to the good
Mhm.
book now, you know, an old Gita thumper. What Krishna actually teaches in the Gita is that we should feel, we must feel, because we're personal souls, but that our emotions should be not suppressed by reason, but governed by reason. And therefore, buddhi, our rational analytic intelligence, has to govern our emotions, so that govern doesn't mean restrain them or hold them back. But let's say I feel a particular emotion, and then is that appropriate? Like, for example, let's say I'm angry at someone, but is that appropriate? You know, does that person deserve my anger?
Mm.
And even if that person may have made some mistake, is my anger the best thing for them or for me? And is it just going to make things worse? So, or let's say someone becomes attached to another person. Is this relationship going to lead me to a happy, fulfilling life, or to a disaster? And as we know, relationships go both ways. And so I, you know, when it's often been presented to me, and I always thought it was absurd that it's about the heart, not the head, or something like that.
There, I feel like, I mean, even as you're saying, civilization or in society, it's like there's a dichotomy, as if we're one or the other, which can
Right.
never be true.
Right.
And just since you were saying the Gita, what was that? Manore Dinirodhyacha. So Vish and I were discussing this, that just that particularly that line, Manore Dinirodhyacha, bring your mind and confine it into your heart. Because the mind itself can, like you're saying, just mislead us and take us
Right,
everywhere.
right.
But if it's brought into the heart, it becomes sort of like a spokesperson, right? Or you can use all your emotional space, all your heart. So, what was the point for you where you were able to switch into? Was there like a breaking point where you just fully embraced your creative side and decided
There
to really
was.
go with your heart?
Actually,
Yes.
yeah, there was actually a particular moment.
Okay.
I was spending several months in San Luis Obispo, beautiful town near the central coast of California, kind of getting away from, to be honest, just trying to get away from all the complications of being a leader of an institution.
Yes.
And I
No, you
just,
deserve a break.
yeah, I took several years of break. And so I was walking in this beautiful park, if you know Central Coast, Laguna Lake Park. Very beautiful park with a big lake and all these mountains around it. And it just suddenly came to me all at once, for me, from the heart, from God,
Right.
that you have to create real people.
Yeah.
You can't just, this can't be cartoonish. It can't be, you really have to let these people live. They have to be real people with real feelings.
Yes.
And it was such a strong thing. I remember I literally took off my hat and threw it up in the air because I just all at once I could just see how to go forward. But even let's say writing this, many authors have said that it's very common that you don't really create the characters; they just kind of appear and present themselves to you, and you sort of follow them around.
Right.
And so it was just I would say I was using my reason by trying to understand who are these people and what are they really feeling, but the people themselves, the character themselves, they are both rational and feeling creatures. So trying to understand them and and trying to understand how I can not get in their way and let them have real lives in this story, lives that will be interesting to other people, and lives that will lead them to where they need to go. And because I know myself, when I read a novel or watch a movie, uh, unless there's someone in the story that I really admire and I'm really rooting for, I drop out of it. I know, for example, I won't mention some of the books I tried to read or some of the movies I tried to watch, but yeah, if I sometimes, it's like for every 20 movies I try to watch, maybe like one or two of them I can actually hang into the end. And so I need that. I need to give one example. Okay, this gets into another important point for me, and that is you could call it philosophy of art or the philosophy of the artist. I think one of the real disasters of Romanticism was this notion of the artist as a type of creative, agnostic, but Old Testament prophet, like speaking truth to power. And of course, everyone that writes or paints, flatters himself that, well, when I'm dead, everyone will realize how great I was. And so it's a lot of narcissism. And so I very much prefer the older concept, the pre-romantic vision of the artist, which is, in a sense, a public servant. The way I see it, every one of us has obviously responsibility to ourselves as individuals to keep ourselves healthy in every sense. But also, we very much have public and social responsibilities. We couldn't even do language if it weren't for society. We couldn't walk down the street in safety. There wouldn't be food in the market.
Right.
So all of us, to me, have profound duties and responsibilities, obligations to society and to God. And the fact that I'm a so-called artist or writer doesn't exempt me. It doesn't mean that I stand above that. I mean, I have to say, so when I when I look at things like, say, the books of James Joyce, I feel like I want to say, can't you just say what you mean so that everybody can understand it? And so to me, I know some people, may be appalled to hear this, but James Joyce is not someone I'm going to read, but say Charles Dickens or Jane Austen, because I was just watching a lecture today on YouTube that Jane Austen's sense of responsibility. Let me just give you as an example, two men who lived in the same place at the same time, had the same social concerns, and yet produced very, very different results. These two men lived in London. One of them is Charles Dickens, the other is Karl Marx.
Right.
Same time.
Very influential, both of them.
Same concerns.
Mm-hmm.
In the name of Marx, about 10 to 20 times more people were killed in the 20th century than those killed by Hitler. Just a statistic. I'll leave it there. Whereas Charles Dickens, a lot of what we take for granted now in terms of social welfare, he had a powerful effect. And so to me, someone like Dickens, all his great novels, Tale of Two Cities, I won't list them here. His commentary on the French Revolution, which was a devastating moral critique of the atrocities of it. And so Charles Dickens was a man with a very profound and intense social conscience who cared deeply. Think of A Christmas Carol.
Yeah.
This deep, deep concern for the state of humanity, not just the poor, but even the moral state of those who are not poor. And he used the novel. He wrote these incredible novels. It's like, I'm just amazed. Like, how did he do that? The way he uses language. Or Victor Hugo. If you look at Les Miserables, which is really what's really going on in Les Miserables. I read the book first. I read the book first. I can't watch the musical afterwards. But you take a man, Jean Valjean, who falls really to the lowest state of humanity, in the sense that he's falsely imprisoned for many, many years. He comes out of prison bitter, angry, as a misanthrope, someone that just despises humanity. And then a priest saves him from the police and gives him a start, and it shocks him, his whole
right.
And so what you see is, going from the lowest position, what Victor Hugo actually did is, he takes this person, Jean Valjean, puts him in the lowest state where he just despises humanity. And step by step, I'm going through all the stages, he becomes practically, a real saint, this God-conscious saint. And you see all the steps. And so, Victor Hugo, if you read, whether you read him in translation or in the French original, I just scratch my head, like, how does he write like that?
But it sounds like what really appeals to you in the works of these, great authors is their social consciousness.
Well, it's the both. It's the fact that Victor Hugo is just like I said, I can't figure out how could someone write that well.
Okay.
So he's a great writer.
Yes.
Both in terms of his language, his plot structure. He's just, obviously a genius. And yet a genius, a literary genius with profound social conscience. Mm-hmm. To me, that's the great artist. Mm-hmm. Someone who writes a book that only the intellectual elites can pretend like they understand or say they understand. A book that doesn't really transform society. To me, that's not the great artist. To me, it's just a form of vanity. It's a form of ego that, I'm an artist. That's what I like about Jane Austen. She didn't hang out with artists. She didn't think I'm an artist. She just, she lived at home. It was her duty to make the breakfast in the morning. And she just sat down at a little table about this big and wrote some of the greatest novels ever written. And so I admire those people who had great social conscience and great skill. The combination, and you were talking about reason and emotion. So in a sense, I think this is sort of parallel, where you combine powerful, deeply felt art with social conscience. To me, that's the great artist, and that's what I was aspired for. I can't say I achieved it, but
I love so many of the things you're saying here, because especially myself, growing up in the Hare Krishna movement, I feel like there was always a big divide between us and them, and it's a sense, the only thing of value we can have is going out and on Harinam and chanting and giving them Krishna. But what you're kind of highlighting here is that we're all in this together. we're all in one society, that division between like us and them is a false thing. And there are different ways, like what you're trying to do with this book, there are different ways to um, uphold that consciousness together. It doesn't have to be so direct. And I want to just read something from your book, a little snippet that made me think of you. And as you were speaking, it just came to me. So this is a direct quote from the book. And I'm going to see. This is Justin Davis speaking, the main character from the book, but I want you to comment on this. So, quote, "It had taken him thousands of years to submit to Krishna, and it might take another few thousand before he dared to risk his public respectability by speaking like a preacher or a true believer." So this is Justin Davis in the book. And so I was wondering, how does that relate to you? Because it seems like you've already risked your public respectability in some ways, you know, in terms of the larger society by being part of the Hare Krishna movement and speaking like a preacher and a true believer. That's basically you. But then your main character, you're having him take a step back and kind of look at that in a different way, and he's not ready to do that. So it's kind of like a
These are really great questions. I'm just admiring the questions, not because they're about me, they're just very thoughtful.
And you know, that also relates to, okay, this book, the story aspect of the
Right.
book will be very appealing to, say, any UF college student.
Right.
But some of the more philosophical aspects might be off-putting or might feel, I mean, to quote another one from the book, Justin wonders, he's wondering about Davy, and he said, or had Davy actually presented a sectarian version of history? So Justin, he's wondering, can I really believe
Yes.
Davy? He's in this process of seeing, is she coming with something genuine? Is she real? Or does she have another motive? Is she presenting a sectarian version of history? And so I felt that kind of related to your book also.
Okay.
Are you presenting a sectarian coming of age story? Is it a sectarian superhero coming of age kind of story? You know, so what are
you up to? So okay,
specifically with this, I mean,
those are really good questions. I'm just admiring the questions. Okay, for some time now, in my own outreach, I have felt a responsibility and just a personal need when I try to teach Krishna consciousness, let's say to people who are not insiders.
Mm-hmm.
I feel a duty to them, actually, to show that it's reasonable. Mm-hmm. And I don't feel that I can urge people to do things, to change their lives, to adopt practices or beliefs beyond the point, I mean, more than I can show them to be reasonable. I only have in a sense, the right to ask people to adopt or believe things to the extent that I can show that those things are reasonable. Mm. And so again, I think it gets back to the connection between the heart and the head. Because to me, a successful, happy, well-balanced, progressive person is precisely one who has integrated the emotions and the rational intelligence. If we just have what Prabhupada called combining religion and philosophy, if in fact history, even recent history, the last few centuries, show the evil and just the absolute catastrophic results when people have ideologies, you know, the age of ideology and dogmas, which don't really have the proper feelings and the proper heart, and leads to genocide in so many ways. And yeah. So as far as those quotes you read, I wanted, the story is not just autobiographical, and obviously any writer puts something of themselves into it, but And so Justin has grown up and lived in a world in which people are very skeptical in general, especially intelligent people, about the possibility, not to speak of the probability, of ever really being God conscious in a profound way, because it's so common in intellectual environments to say, well, no one really can know God, and that's just your opinion. And of course, all the foolishness of postmodernism, subjectivism. That's won't get on that soapbox right now. But I think it's ultimately terrible philosophy and destructive in its own way. The idea that everybody has their own truth. It's sort of like, to me, it's the ultimate, it's like the cherry on the cake or the icing of narcissism, because now we democratize reality. So everyone has their own truth and no one. So like right now, for example, if you think we're in Gainesville and I think we're on the outer ring of Saturn, that's just your truth that we're in Gainesville right now. And my truth is that we're on the outer ring of Saturn. When I was a kid, they called that clinical insanity.
I think, I mean, just to jump in on that, I think that seems to be a reaction to pendulum swings, because the world has been so controlled by religious organizations. And so I think people are now swinging to, like, you can't tell me what to think or what to believe or what's true, because I'm going to determine that for myself.
Yeah,
and there is something, I mean, there's something valid in that, but then maybe, as you're pointing out, it might be
I would
swinging a little
pendulum.
too
Yeah,
far.
I mean, I've endlessly explained these things as a result of historical dialectic, a la Hegel. The synthesis, the antithesis. I mean, the thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So, although apparently he didn't actually use those terms, but they're always attributed to him, but it kind of boils down to that. I mean, you're certainly right. I mean, I'm convinced that history does move dialectically, or pendulum effect. I mean, it's Newton's, I think, third law of motion.
Equal and opposite.
Every action produces an equal and opposite reaction.
Right.
And that's why extremisms, left or right, will always destabilize society and never actually get to the point, because they must produce an equal and opposite extreme. And so, but if you look at Western history, and I mean, I think on the one hand, of course, you're right, that rejection of objective truth comes from a very bad history of having, to a great extent, irrational religious truths violently imposed.
Right.
However, among those who respond to it, there will always be those who are just proud and to take advantage, kind of want a free ride on the dialectic, just to indulge their own vanity and narcissism. And so it's a complex situation, but so what I say is that, and I've often said this in my lectures, that what we need now is to move forward to the third stage of the dialectic. Because if you're living in antithesis, you're not really living, because you're just defining yourself as the opposite of what you don't like. And so I think history has to move forward to the next stage, the synthesis, where that's why, for example, they have an innovation center, the district here by the University of Florida, in which they have there's three words like create, imagine, or something like that. And the third one is disrupt. And I just thought, God, is that foolish? Because, yeah, disrupt bad things. Like, let's say we want to disrupt serious diseases. We want to disrupt bigotry, but there are many good things. And so before you disrupt, maybe you better find out.
Don't destroy the system.
Yeah, what you're disrupting. Maybe you're disrupting something like, for example, we recently had a politician that came in and disrupted a kind of consensus that people should not either be racist or at least not publicly express racist views. And then, a politician comes along and disrupts that. So disruption is not a good. It depends on what you're disrupting.
Right. So what are you disrupting with this novel? What is Justin Davis? What, I mean, to bring it back to the novel.
Yes.
Is it a response?
I think
to something.
To some extent, it's a response to my perception that the Krishna consciousness movement is not sufficiently reaching people. The Prabhupada even said cultural conquest. I think we have to create culture. There tends to be an idea in ISKCON that to present culture means to bring culture from South Asia, and that's culture.
Mm.
And if you look at culture in general, I hope I am getting back to the book here. My view is that great culture, whether it's literature, dance. I know you're a great dancer.
Thank you.
I've watched your videos. So whether it's dance or singing or playing music or writing or painting, great culture by definition it's always historically situated in the sense that you live at a certain time and place, and yet it transcends. It definitely it definitely embodies a historical reality, but at the same time transcends it. Like, for example, the music of Bach, to give one example, which I play on the keyboard. It's clearly it's Baroque music. Everything about it is Baroque. The counterpoint, it's Baroque music, and it actually represents even the reality of German Baroque music and the Lutheran Church in some of the sacred music that Bach wrote a lot of sacred music. And at the same time, even though Bach's music is definitely rooted historically, but from that root, it grows and transcends it. So it speaks to basically, lots of people at all times, everywhere. And so I think the real issue is that let's say you take a certain form of Indian culture. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that, that Western culture is better. I'm just saying that if you take a certain form of Indian culture, let's say painting or music. And so on the one hand, it's definitely historically situated. If you know the history of India, you'll know exactly where it's coming from. Right. But then the question is, to what extent does a particular, let's say, South Asian cultural expression, yes, to what extent does it transcend its historical matrix and powerfully speak to people at other times and places? Mm-hmm. And my personal opinion, this is just me, is that often in the Krishna movement, that the transcendent power of Indian culture tends to be exaggerated. Some of it really is transcendent, but a lot of it, I think, we tend to exaggerate how much it really does transcend. And of course, you can measure this by seeing how many people actually
resonate with it.
Yeah, Western people, let's say, of their own accord, just that's what they prefer when they download music, when they go to the theater, and so on. And so I think that does tend to be exaggerated. There's a certain niche. There's a certain cultural space in the West for world culture, and it's respected, and it should be respected. It's impressive, culture, and so there's a certain world culture market. But in terms of mainstream, for example, Bollywood, which is interesting, but Bollywood is getting more attention because they're more kind of adopting the sort of global norms for good movies in many different ways. Yeah. So I think that's our duty. You're obviously an artist, and you're obviously very talented and intelligent. And I think our responsibility is to find artistic expressions, whether it's a novel, a dance, whether it's song or painting, whatever it is, that actually reach people. And I think we do have to pay attention to the numbers. I think it's a tragic mistake to think, Gyata Sukriti, that, well, maybe not a lot of people are interested in this, but it's the future, it's destined to be because it comes from India, or that they're getting benefit even if they don't know it. And I think those are very dangerous ideas. I think we really need to pay attention to the extent to which we're reaching people.
Well, that's kind of nice, having a sense of respecting the feedback that we're receiving.
Yeah.
Are they appreciating what we're offering or not?
Yeah.
And so where do you envision, the best case scenario of this? It just came out yesterday, correct? The book?
Yeah.
So what's your
I haven't got mine yet.
what's your dream for this book? Where do you, it sounds like, you're very eager to kind of break open and for it to land,
Yeah,
not just land in your home base, but land further out. So
yeah,
what's your kind of dream for this book? Where do you envision it? Whose hands, or which group of people, or
right, right.
whom, where do you just kind of dream or envision this book to land?
Oh, I mean, if my dream, I mean, I would like it to sell millions of copies. I don't
Right.
expect that to happen, but I mean, that's what I would love to happen. I mean, just being, because we know each other very well.
Yes.
I think, and your questions, this is really one of the best interviews I've ever done. I'm gonna have to take you around with me. So, I mean, realistically, I have to kind of break out a little bit for my own institutional, what do you call it? Not apathy, but because the reality is, if we want to just be honest,
Mhm.
we're adults,
Mhm.
that in the Hare Krishna movement or ISKCON and so on, even though thousands of people do kind of follow me, which is kind of like, how did that happen? But anyway, because anyway, so, and yet the institutional, like, the institutional ISKCON, so to
Yes.
speak, mainstream institutional, kind of, I don't want to say blackballs me, but they sort of avoid me. And so, for example, I did a Bhagavad Gita,
Right. Yes.
and the feedback has been fantastic. I mean, you can give it to your dentist, you can give it to your neighbor, you can give it to anyone, they're going to like it. And
Mhm.
so we've had just like an incredible feedback. And yet, the Hare Krishna movement as an institution will never promote it. Will never actually, never, like the BBT, the book thing. I mean,
Really?
yeah. And so
Okay.
I've kind of, I can see that, and now it's my younger associates who are actually like nudging me, come on, we got to promote this. And so I think what I need to do, or for example, now because of the COVID thing, there's all these spiritual, what do they call, strategic, they're like every day in your inbox you get all these things,
Yes.
and so they'll never ask me to do a program even though thousands of people listen to me. Or if they do a film about, promotional film about ISKCON, they won't interview me. And
So you've
so,
already kind of established yourself as a controversial figure, or someone who maybe isn't towing the party line.
well, because I realize that this, I don't want to say the ship is sinking. I mean, I don't want to use it. Maybe that's over dramatic language, but there is, if you're an academically trained historian, you will know that ISKCON is an historical crisis in terms of trying to maintain or just trying to get back to what we were when Prabhupada was here, relevant, well known, and so on. And that's not the case now
Yeah.
among, let's say, a non-Hindu audience, either in India or diaspora.
Right. Well, so let me just bring it back to actually my very first question.
Okay, so if I can just add one more thing.
Okay, yes, go
I don't
ahead.
want to interrupt you.
No.
So therefore, in a sense, what I need to do, and what I've been a little lazy and I haven't done it, but now with the young people with me, they understand these things much. They know much better than I do what's going on out there. And so we need to create our own sort of promotional thing to get it out to the world, which that's what authors normally do. And so I've been kind of maybe a little too apathetic because I've been in an institution, but an institution which, as an institution, is sort of committed to not promoting what I do.
Right.
And so I think the next step that I need to take is to work with all these brilliant young people that Krishna is sending that are helping me, and start to promote things. I would like a lot of people to read it.
Right.
Not, I think I can honestly say, not just trying to sound humble or something, that I've lived long enough, so whether I'm a best-selling author or not, it's like, gonna eat my rice every day and have a banana. But
yeah, your whole life isn't riding on it,
yeah,
and yet it is a kind of major achievement for you.
but it is something I want, because if I didn't really think the book could help people a lot, then I wouldn't care. But I think it can. I think it is a good book, not to my credit, but just I think I was blessed somehow be an instrument to do this.
And how long did it take you to complete the book? I mean, of course, we
Yes.
know the whole,
Yes.
writer's block in this, but actually, like, if you look at your execution hours,
I would say more than writer's block, I had to grow to, I think both as a human being and as a spiritual practitioner, I had to grow into the service.
Mhm.
And so as far as how long, when I'm really in my groove, so to speak, I'd say I try to write 4 to 6 hours a day. And so it took years. I mean, it took years working because in my friends, I had so many friends, especially my age, my younger ones, they made a little more shy about saying it. My old friends would say they actually had all these theories that there was a psychological issue. There was some psychological block. And that's why I didn't just publish. Come on, it's good enough. Just publish it.
Mhm.
And they wanted to, some even suggested I get professional help. But I knew very well that when the book is ready, I'll know it.
Mhm.
Krishna will tell me.
So it has like various drafts kind of been sitting on your computer for years.
Not just sitting, but I just knew it's not there yet. I knew it's not ready. And I didn't want to publish for all posterity something that I knew wasn't ready.
Right.
And so I just kept working on it, but in the process, I had to grow. If I could just mention one thing about the art of writing.
Yes.
Which I experienced. That is, if you go to a psychologist and they say, like, here are some ink spots, what do you see? I see my grandmother poisoning me, something. So it's, they give you something. So the act of creating a story sort of pulls out your deep psychology.
Yeah, that's why I think it's so raw and so terrifying for many people, because it's like you are putting yourself on the line. You're revealing parts of yourself that you normally wouldn't.
Or you reveal them to yourself. And so I found, and this is just a general note on writing that may be useful to writers, that when I first started writing, there was a stage where I had to break through my own, this is embarrassing, I had to break through that. Absolutely. I'm sure as a dancer, you've got to be willing to go out there and just express yourself.
Well, and I have my, my Ramayan retelling with my mom.
Yes, you're also an author.
That really required that kind of tons of writers breakthrough, so I can.
I wish I had your book here to promote it. Vrinda, her mother is a great artist. She's also a great writer, dancer, very talented person, and so buy her book. I don't have one to show, but what's it called?
Well, it's the Sita's Fire trilogy, and you can find all the details at sitasfire.com. Book 3 is coming out now in April.
Sitasfire.com. Yeah. It's great.
Yes, thank you.
So I found my first stage was to break through all that. But then when I broke through, there was another stage I had to go through. And that is when I'm just like, the novel as an endless Rorschach test or something. It's where I'm creating characters. And then I went back and I looked at it. I said, why do the women tend to be like this? Or why do the men tend to be like that? And it was very emotional, because when I finally opened up, I found that sometimes I'd be writing and I would only notice afterwards that I'd been just like crying for 10 minutes.
That's beautiful. And I'm going to jump in there with something that really stood out to me, is that several of the prominent characters in the book are women. And you kind of go out of your... Including the guru. The most exalted person in the book is a female. And you kind of go out of your way to say that, Justin, the main character in the book, for him, these women become key reference points in his life. In other words, throughout his life, these women are extremely influential in his life. And you've written them so beautifully, the female characters. And so I wanted to just jump in and ask, would you be comfortable calling this kind of like a feminist work? Or what was your kind of thought process? Was it an accident that these women became, so they hold their ground equally with their male counterparts? I mean, there's no sense of them being less than or inferior or subordinate or any of these things that traditionally, a woman should always be subordinate to a man and so on. It seemed to me that there was that question didn't even come to the forefront in the book, because you've really just exalted all the female characters to be on equal ground. And, Devi, the guru, is a female. So it's like she's also the most exalted one. So that was very moving to me personally, and if you can speak about that.
I had a great mother. And so I grew up thinking that, if a woman is very intelligent and has excellent character and loving, that's normal.
Right.
That's just normal for a woman to be a leader, to be intelligent. And so, as far as saying it's feminist, I think Davy really inspired me. And I think I wanted, it's not that I wrote it with a political motive, but I was happy when these characters emerge the way they do. And I was never going to write a book where the women are less than the men, because that's just not my own.
That's not your experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I could just get back to one thing, and that is that there's Radhika. She's a great lady. I found that once like the floodgates open, I really kind of opened myself, my own heart or emotions, where I could that I had to go through a period where inevitably all of my own deep psychology was coming up. And a lot of times nowadays in modern art or modern fiction or modern anything, they think that's okay, that's it, I've arrived because I'm being authentic. But I knew, no, that's just the second stage. The third stage, which I got through by working through all this emotional stuff, was where I had now the ability to feel and to feel deeply and all that. But I myself, as the writer, had become much more transparent. In other words, I'm not creating characters a certain way or having certain things happen to them or have them feel certain things because my own stuff is coming up. I sort of became aware of all that, and I could just be a writer. And with the ability to feel, and hopefully to feel deeply, but that I was not unknowingly or knowingly just imposing my own deep psychology on the characters. I felt the characters had a right to live their own lives. And I saw myself, in a sense, as a servant of, facilitator of these people who have their own lives.
Wow, so to be the best servant you could be, you felt like you had to remove or be honest about what was coming up for you, and then work with that and remove that from them.
Yes.
Not impose that on them.
Exactly. I didn't want to unconsciously or consciously just have the book or the characters as just an instrument of my self-expression. I wanted to honor them like it's about them. It's not about me. But naturally, because we're all human and we're all souls, I think I had deep empathy for a lot of the characters. And but still, it was them, not me.
Can you share with us? That was, you said that during the writing process, you would find yourself in tears. You were so deeply moved by what was. Would you share with us one scene or one unfolding from the book?
Sure.
That brought up that really deep emotion for you?
Yeah, I actually a lot of those most emotional scenes didn't make the final cut. Although but they did, but they became themselves rather than, I'm trying to think. I think they sometimes involved sort of pathos, tragedy, where people were misunderstood and even like tragically misunderstood or separated from loved ones.
Would you mind sharing a little bit more? Because, I don't want to give away spoilers, but if you say it, then, so maybe can we, step away from, other works and step into this work and just speak a little bit in depth about the book itself? Maybe you can.
You're the best interviewer I've ever come across.
So going into the work itself, what is it? A chapter, a scene, like you're saying, can we maybe go a little deeper into the specifics of the book, and what was something that was very moving for you, something that really brought you to that, even if it didn't, you're saying some of it got cut out, but it must have informed the process and
I'm
made
trying
it
to
very
think, yeah,
potent.
what brought me to tears and actually made the final
Because
cut.
so far we've only said Justin Davis, the name, and we've heard of Davy, but
I think one thing, and this may say, I mean, I hope it's not more general than you wanted, but I think from the very beginning, because I had different versions, and I mean, it was always kind of the same story, but it really grew and grew and grew.
Mhm.
But I think a common denominator that moved me a lot was the character Davy. She's a young lady, but she's one of the main characters, and how the world misunderstood her.
Yeah, the second half.
Yeah, and of course, back in the other place, no spoilers there, but and I think that was kind of I think one thing that really moved me was you having this great young lady who was who I admire profoundly.
Mm-hmm.
I think that came out.
Yes.
And yet being subjected to type of, you could say, social injustice.
Yeah.
Because the world simply didn't understand her.
Because she had yogic powers, or she's, so exalted that people would just negatively assume that it was like witchcraft, and
yes,
so it was kind of a witch hunt against her, and that felt.
And also by, you could say, dark forces who were actively acting against her,
right?
And the world believing the wrong version.
Yeah.
So that.
Yeah, so she is the most exalted person in the book, but yet she's the most feared, and people assume the worst, misunderstood, and they assume they're afraid rather than seeing her greatness. They're fearful of her, and that felt really just unjust to you and very kind of heavy.
Well, it was it got to me, to use the common phrase.
Right.
And I also should give credit to, a lot of people, some people have to give credit to, but there's one friend, Shamala Kishori, who's not here, but Shamala. And it's funny because she wrote me a comment. She read an earlier version of the book, and she said Davy was almost too
exalted.
Well, like frozen, because as a great yogini, and so then I had to go back and I had to try to understand, because someone can be spiritually advanced, but also have very strong feelings, as we know. So how those feelings come out in this world in a way which doesn't lead people to misunderstand that this person is mundane. Right. And so what kind of deep emotions, which are understandable to human beings, are still appropriate for someone who is on a high spiritual level.
Right.
And as we know, even in, we know in our own exalted institution that it's been a point which the institution has struggled to understand, like what kinds of emotions, when do you say that emotions are inappropriate, or at least inappropriate for someone in a certain spiritual position, and when are they appropriate, and what does, can someone be spiritually advanced and still have all kinds of feelings even about other people, and
right.
And it's something which, there's danger on both ends, because one can sort of unwittingly materialize spiritual positions and sort of open the floodgates to all types of imitation, hypocrisy, and so on. But on the other hand, one can have sort of an unstated impersonal view.
No, I could see you really exploring that in the book, that there was this meditation on eternal love versus corporeal love. How much is our love based on just the body of the person, or our relationship right now, versus the eternal, more. You do explore that quite both directly and indirectly in the book.
Yes, right? Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And one thing I particularly loved about Justin is his family values. I mean, he's very motivated by taking care of his mother and his brother. That's like one of his primary driving forces. And that was so beautiful to read because, again, growing up in the Krishna movement, I haven't always felt that family is valued, or, you know, honoring your family relations. That's maybe historically not been something that a man or a person or a family person is, encouraged to do. It's more, you should serve Krishna or you should serve God, and, don't become attached. There's been so much fear around expressing emotion. I can't even imagine for you as a guru, it must have been even more so. You know, yeah, I just can't even imagine how much more that pressure you've had to work with that expectation around your heart and what you're allowed to express.
Very well put. I think that's exactly right.
So I'm going to jump back to my very first
Please.
question about the two driving forces of the book that I saw. One was this, like, telling a good story, and I think you've spoken about that, your desire to create like a really good work, and you're obviously super well read and a lover of the arts, and I think that shows in the story aspect of the book, which is very strong. And then we have this other aspect, which is also another big part of your identity, is transmitting something spiritual. And so my kind of question when I read the book is, okay, the story aspect is going to appeal to a mainstream audience, but then maybe some of the more spiritual aspects, then and I've tried to ask you throughout the interview, do you think that a regular reader approaching this book, how will they feel about those maybe more sectarian or religious or overtly
Mhm.
devotional aspects? How do you think that that's going to land, since you want to sell 1 million copies or more of this book?
Very good. Um, I did think a lot about that. And I mean, the notion of religion as such, which is, I mean, among other things, not exclusively, really a sociological notion.
Mm.
It's a group of people acting together in certain ways, certain structures and hierarchies, and so on and so forth. And there's a whole field called sociology of religion.
Right.
And so, in trying to present Krishna, and in a sense, Krishna can't simultaneously be true and sectarian. So I went with true.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I actually, to use a good old word, harkened back. In my mind, I thought back to the time before I became a member of the institution. I was, I guess, about 20 years old, 19 or 20 years old, from California, and a student at Berkeley. My parents living in Southern California, and sort of like The Graduate without Mrs. Robinson. So, so when I first started to learn about Krishna, it wasn't a religion to me. It wasn't, and it wasn't an institution. It was just, first of all, is this wonderful concept. It was philosophy. I began to read Bhagavad Gita, and it was ontology specifically. It was the philosophy of being, and so my own attitude toward Krishna, or toward chanting, the Krishna mantra, or associating with practitioners, or looking at the art, or eating the sacred food. Um, the last thing in the world, in my mind, was that I'm joining a religion.
Mm-hmm.
That's just not what I understood I was doing, because the way I put it, I wasn't looking for a religion. I already had one. My parents gave me one.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, it wasn't about religion. It was knowledge. It was direct experience. And so, and Krishna to me was this supremely fascinating, attractive person.
Mm-hmm.
And so I tried in the book to get back to that,
Mm-hmm.
to peel off, at least in my writing. I didn't want to present Krishna as, so to speak, the god of religion. I'm not saying, I'm not denying that, but the god of religion, or as the sacred deity of an institution. I was really just trying to get back to the pure uh, experience of Krishna. And I know there was some sci-fi series done somewhere, Australia or somewhere in the world, where they had Krishna in it. And what's interesting, Krishna was in it in a totally non-religious way, but it was Krishna.
Mm.
And so I thought, in the book, I sort of consciously avoided the language, the vocabulary of piety and religion,
Mm.
not to hide Krishna, but to, in a sense, to uncover him.
Right. So you feel like in the book you really made an effort to strip away maybe some of the religious connotations or obstacles to really
Yes.
get back to your original fascination of Krishna,
Yes.
a bigger reality
Yes.
than just
Not to deny or criticize, let's say, Krishna's role as someone who does center and sustain religion for thousands of years. I'm not trying to say that, for people who are more, let's say, need all the support of that institution or of that religious language.
you don't want to take that away, but for
Because
you there is more.
Yeah, it's not invalid. I mean,
Right.
it's valid. It's a way that human beings for thousands of years have been trying to approach transcendence.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm not saying that, I'm better than you, or that you shouldn't do that, or that's not a good thing to do at all. I understand that historically, in terms just the nature of human beings, that's something most human beings need.
Yes.
But in trying to communicate to people outside an institution, I'm trying to show that Krishna may, play that role. He does play that role. He has for thousands of years as the deity of religion, but that there's a way to experience Krishna outside an institutional framework and outside, because when we say religion, it's just like, for example, in India, people have a certain way of being religious. And therefore, based on their culture, history, psychology, group psychology. And so when Krishna is the center of their religious behavior and sentiments and all that, they have a certain way of doing it. To give a simple example, when people are inspired by the divine, or believe they're being inspired by the divine, then they typically, throughout the world, throughout history, express their joy, express their conviction through music.
Mm-hmm.
And so in India, people make music in a certain way. They use certain instruments, they use certain rhythms. And I think there's a mistake that's almost very widely made. Mm. And that is to assume that, let's say, if Indians make devotional music in a certain way, or they praise Krishna with certain kinds of music, they're doing that because that's Krishna music, and the Indians are just fortunate to have received this spiritual music. I think it's the opposite. I think their devotion can be pure. However, they make certain kinds of music to glorify Krishna because that's the kind of music people in South Asia made. I think obviously it's interactive to some extent. The presence of Krishna in their culture has shaped their cultural expression. Right. But I also believe that their general culture, and we know that because the proof of it is that, let's say you play certain Indian musical instruments, most of the Indians or Hindus or Muslims that use those instruments are not doing it for Krishna. They're doing it for all kinds of things. Right. And so
I mean, this is something you're very passionate about, I think, across the board, kind of releasing Krishna from just having to be expressed in a certain way.
A certain ethnic straitjacket,
Yeah,
you could
you
say.
feel like, there's so much more. It's the devotion that matters, not so much what instrument you play or what accent you have or what language you speak.
Or like take food, for example.
I've heard this one.
It's I mean, if you look at Indian history, even though Krishna has been, I mean, probably the single most important spiritual personality in South Asian history, and yet the culture, the Indian culture, or South Asian really more, has been heavily influenced by many different strains coming from many places in the world and by many other beliefs that go under the rubric of Hinduism, which is a different story. And so therefore, I think, for example, when I was in India, I met in an airport, just happened to talk for a moment with some gentleman who was from South India, Kerala, and a Christian.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I kind of saw, I had learned by talking to him that they feel more Christian when they wear Western suits.
Right.
It makes them feel Christian. So what I'm trying to do is get to an eternal Krishna who's not South Asian, who's not Western, who's not just, because institutions, I would say, are not, very difficult for them to be absolutely transparent.
And plus, they don't have a monopoly on something that's beyond,
yes,
human grasp, really.
Yes, and I think just sociologically, for example, if you and I were just talking,
mm-hmm.
It might not be the exact same conversation as, let's say we were in an auditorium with 300 people listening.
Right.
We probably joke a lot more. But so that's what I'm trying to do in that book, and that's what I'm trying to do even in the Mahabharata that I'm working on now.
Mm-hmm.
Is I'm trying to get at a non-ethnic Krishna, a Krishna who has not been, to some extent, I don't know, you'd say, the vision of Krishna has not been affected by history and social forces and ethnic preferences and all that, and just get to Krishna.
Right.
A Krishna who is as familiar to and interesting to Westerners or people in South Asia or East Asian people or Pacific Islanders. What?
All attractive?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one.
So I encourage anyone who's watching this to pick up Justin Davis and experience Goswami's, vision of Krishna beyond religion, and you're going to get it in an awesome story format too. So it's a win-win, I think. And I think I have one final question to conclude, and then I think we have questions and comments that we may be taking.
Oh, yes,
possibly.
because we're on social media, aren't we?
Okay, so
no,
maybe no question and comments, but I have one final question for you, which I think we'll use to kind of wrap up today's interview. So Justin Davis, he kind of comes into his power in different ways through the story. But one, speaking of Krishna, you do introduce the idea of Krishna being present in his holy name, and that's one of the methods that Justin uses to tap into his own.
I don't think I said holy. Did I say holy?
Yes.
I did?
Yes.
In the who? Oh, I was curious.
Did I insert that with my own mind? You do say that he's present in his name,
yes,
maybe not
yes.
holy name. Okay, so maybe you just say name minus the holy. But you definitely use, the Maha Mantra, the mantra for him to, tap into his kind of superhero powers in a way. So I just wanted to conclude maybe on a light note that my impression of the holy name is that it's used for us to reach kind of a devotional connection to Krishna, and then here in the novel it's kind of used as a method to tap into your superpowers. So do you want to speak about
that? I think that ultimately we're saying the same thing, because I do try to make very clear that one can tap into, and everyone has superpowers if you tap into them, because we're all spiritual beings. That the price you have to pay, to use crass capitalist imagery there, the price you have to pay to tap into your power is pure devotion. And because that Justin had to realize that he could not access those powers just by practicing a lot, even by mundane virtues like courage and all that. He really did have to go within, and he had to acknowledge himself as a spiritual being, which of course people don't want to do if they're still attached to using their body to exploit the world, or wanting to get all kinds of attention for their body or something. You can't do that. And so the requirements, which are explained to him over and over again, is that he does have to do the spiritual part.
Yeah, well, Justin is such a fascinating character that you've made, because he's pursuing his ambitions in both the material realm and the spiritual realm, and his ambition is to be the best in both worlds, right?
Yeah.
To really, I mean, by best I mean reaching the highest, like in this world.
Yeah, to be the best he can be.
So there wasn't, often when we pursue spiritual things, there is the idea, oh, we need to renounce the world, we need to be poor, we need to not be of this world, we need to retreat. But in the book you really show that he is able to pursue excellence in this world through wealth, education, affluence, everything. He's able to ascend to what we see as the highest in this world, but he's simultaneously equally preoccupied with transcending on the eternal level. So I really enjoyed that part of the book.
Yeah, in fact, if he doesn't get the spiritual part, he's inevitably going to misuse the material part, as we see nowadays.
And there is more books coming, right? Because I did feel like there was plenty of cliffhangers at the end.
Yeah, in fact, I conceived last little story, and I want to thank you. I've known Vrinda. How old were you when I first saw her?
Probably 14 or 15. Yeah. So
and I have to say, she was in a girls' school, spiritual girls' school, and I'd go there sometimes and give a little guest lecture. And you were always kind of the most interesting person, because you were very bright.
Well, thank you.
And very bright and very what's the word? Confident in the right way, self-confident in the right way. You were never afraid to raise points that you thought were important, and I really enjoyed that.
Well, I think I should thank you for being the type of teacher that encourages independent thinking. You do love to, I felt very encouraged and very supported to be a little cheeky, to speak up, to, be just with it, That's kind of what you expect from your students. So I think that's to your credit.
I love that. I was always impressed by you. So, and so thank you very much. You did a great interview, and
you were our professor at UF as well.
Yeah, we were also our professor at UF, which we really enjoyed.
Yeah, thanks for taking the class. So I hope people do read the book. So last little thing I was going to say, Amarendra.
Yes, the lawyer.
Yeah. He's an old friend of mine. So years ago, my God, when would that have been? Well, we can look it up. There was a movie playing in the theaters then called Dragonheart. There's a movie called Dragonheart. And he took me to see it. And of course, in those days, for someone who's,
very
in our institution,
right?
to go to a movie, that was like...
My dad still does not watch movies. I'm sure there are many.
Yeah, that was not done so much. So, but I went to this movie, and what I learned and had not known is that Hollywood had made amazing breakthroughs in computer graphics. And in terms of the realism, just technically, movies were so different than what I'd seen when I was young, before I began my monastic journey. So, and I was astonished by it. It's just, And I remember on the way home, when he's driving me back home for the movie, I think he bought the ticket, which is nice. But on the way home, I had this vision that this is what I have to do. Not screenplays necessarily, but that there's a whole world of narration, of storytelling, and it just inspired me so much. And I remember when I got home, I thought, I've got to finish this book, which became the Justin Davis book. And I thought, this is like an opportunity for me to try, as far as I can, to learn to write.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so this whole book, I start, in a sense, for me, I was trying to learn as like you could say a midlife, career option. I was trying to learn how to write.
Yeah.
And I was consciously reading books, like how do you write novels and the hero's journey, 12-step hero's journey. I was really trying to learn this and study it. How do you write? So I wanted to reach people. And so I thought in this book, hopefully, if I'm lucky, I'll learn how to write. And then I can take all that to the Mahabharata. And so amazing things. I'll just say this, and then I know we've probably gone long enough, but I feel that Krishna, in our language, is just showing me amazing things. And the Mahabharata, I hope to publish first volume in a couple of months. I think devotees will be very surprised. It's something very new. And it's kind of like trying to use all this, whatever I could learn about writing, and then approach that ancient story of Krishna coming to this world in a very different way, but in a way that does not violate, you could say, an ancient tradition, stays within the tradition, but in terms of storytelling, approaches it in a very different way. So stay tuned.
Yeah, that's what I really try to do with retelling the Ramayana, deliver it in a storytelling format that's compatible with the modern audience's need to be with the characters in real time.
Hey, you can mention one more time your book.
Oh, yeah. So just as Goswami was saying, he's coming out with a Mahabharata, the ancient Indian epic. He's also delivering it in a way that's going to be like an exciting story, and maybe not constrained by some of the more, Sanskrit storytelling devices are quite different than a modern the way we tell stories now and the way we want to be with the characters. So that's kind of what I also brought to retelling the Ramayana. My mother and she illustrated and I wrote. We just completed this trilogy, retelling the Ramayana, bringing in the female characters much more, and also, really working it in a story that feels more, you can follow along with it quite smoothly and enter into the lives of the characters. And you can find all of that at sitasfire.com. But don't forget to pick up Justin Davis. And I feel pretty confident that there's going to be more of them, because I think the way you set up the ending there, you left it open for yourself so that there's going to be more Justin Davises to come. We want to know more about Davy. We want to know more about Justin, and of course Joey and Star Davis. We want to know how their lives are going to unfold. So thank you very much for allowing me to interview you.
Maybe someday I'll interview you about your book.
Oh, I would love that.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and I always love chatting with you. So
thank you, and you really are one of the best of your generation.
Oh, thank you very much.
So thank you all for listening. I hope we'll see you all again soon.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Someone.